Hello, Lynn. Nice to see you again.
Hi,
And
Sumati.
always lovely to speak to you. This is the second episode of our Knowledge and Practice, the CI Chronicles, which is a podcast focusing on competitive intelligence in professional services firms. And we are speaking to CI experts about their experiences to date, insights, navigating the opportunities and challenges, risks of the whole explosion of LLMs. Clearly, I mean, it's, with tools like ChatGPT, it's in your face that you can
hmm
do some of this through ChatGPT like tools. But I think you and me know that that's not the all of it. And I think
Right.
that's the knowledge we're looking to bring to our audiences. The
Yeah.
conversations are going to be free flowing, so don't feel obliged to stick to the questions. Uh, as I said, I'm going to start with asking you to show your tattoos to the audience. When this is on
All right.
YouTube, I love them. I love them. See?
Here, let me
And,
stand up for a second.
okay.
Yeah. There we
and
go.
I and I love your profile of Nerds Rule as well. And I
hmm
hear you're going to maybe bring in some office illusions, so we'll we'll do that
Okay.
in the course of this conversation. All right. Okay.
Sounds good.
um, with that, let's get started. We don't want to run out of
Let's do
time.
it.
So, Lynn, I think I'm going to start with share a little bit about your career journey, and I particularly would love for you to talk about how did you get to the law firm competitive intelligence function, because I see from your profile that's not where you started, and
Right.
so interested in hearing about that as you speak about your
Okay.
career journey.
Great. Yeah, I'll keep it quick and dirty. Basically, I grew up doing marketing research, so I've had a background in statistics and, data gathering, insight generation for the better part of 2 decades at this
Uh-huh.
point. I've learned a lot along the way. And the one thing that I've noticed is that it doesn't really matter what industry you're in, the principles remain the same. There are industry specific knowledge bases that would make
Yeah.
one an expert in that industry. But if you understand the principles of, how do you design a focus group? What is the best way to get respondents in? Or, what's the right data visualization given the data that you have in front of you? If you understand those foundational principles, it can take you in any industry. And I bring that up to say I've had kind of a diverse career in that respect. I started off in higher education as a marketing analyst doing things like, campaign development with response rates using, microsites and behavioral targeting using, segmentation databases and what have you. Moving on from there to being a consultant at Wells Fargo, doing, voice of the customer research with
Mhm.
text modeling software. Most of people now would know it as IBM's text modeler. It used to be owned by SPSS for anybody who's old enough to remember that. And then at Harris Teeter, which if you're on the East Coast or primarily in the Mid Atlantic, you know them as a large grocery store chain. And we did a lot of corporate research there on mystery shopping, usability testing for the website and apps, surveys, focus groups, you name it, CSAT studies. Uh, and so it gave me a real sort of diverse perspective on all the ways that data can be useful. And so when I saw that the first law firm I worked at was Bass, Berry and Sims, and that was about 8 years ago. And I saw the opportunity there because what they were trying to achieve and what I felt that I brought to the table aligned nicely. The firm needed somebody who was stronger in research, who really could take the data and turn it into something that the lawyers would be able to act on as opposed to just giving them a data dump of information.
Uh-huh.
And so I really enjoyed that job, but then I just decided to move on as the growth opportunities presented themselves to me. And that's how I landed at Baker Botts. I am now sort of able to run free, if you will, to an
Uh-huh.
extent. To an extent, let me be clear. To an
Uh-huh.
extent, I can run free with my ideas and my crazy, just harebrained thinking that gets tolerated and many times gets put into place. It's kind of great. So I've got a very diverse background, but a lot of what I
Mm.
did prior to coming to legal set the stage for me getting into competitive intelligence.
I'm gonna dig into that answer a little bit and to give
Okay.
perspective on why. Um, for and I wouldn't say our audience. I expect our audience to maybe be primarily competitive intelligence functions in law firms. But, you know,
Mm-hmm.
for an audience beyond that, and in my interactions with just people outside the industry, many don't even know that a competitive intelligence function exists in law firms, or
Right.
there is a purpose to competitive intelligence functions, because, you know, in the outside world is this impression that, what do you mean? We just call a lawyer and they take the business and they make tons of money. And like, what do they need to sell for? Or, you know, kind of a, what do you mean? And you know, I think if I'm being completely honest, I'd say that before I started working with law firms, that might have been my perspective too. So, so I'm kind of curious to hear your commentary on that in terms of, you know, what is that purpose that you found? I know you to be a very purpose-driven person.
Yeah, because if my brain is left to go on its own, it could get scary. I can go in a ton of different directions. I've always got ideas. I always have to dial it back. I have a couple of colleagues like Nicole Goodwin. You know, Nicole. I
Yeah, I do.
trust them to rein me in and keep me focused. Otherwise, my ideas can take over. You know, when it comes to lawyers, they're such a smart group of people. They're technical experts, but not all of them were trained to be business developers. And
Uh-huh.
so the idea that they can just sort of, they'll just take any business and they'll just run with it, I think is, I'm not sure what the right word is. It's misleading. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Uh-huh.
They don't just take the business in, at least not the savvy lawyers. Let me be more
Uh-huh.
clear about this. The savvier lawyers, because they understand what their sweet spot is in terms of what they know, what they can do. But where they may not have the chops is
Uh-huh.
understanding their client or target's industry or who they're competing against for the business. And that's not a knock on them. They
Uh-huh.
can't do everything all at once. They have to focus on what they do well. And so they come to people like me to say, okay, we got this pitch coming up. We need to understand better what their pain points are.
Uh-huh.
What keeps the general counsel up at night? What can we sell to them in addition to, you know, what they came to us for? So maybe they came to us for project finance, but they're like,
Uh-huh.
but we know that the industry is volatile, it's changing, it's got all of the, you know, maybe AI is influencing and there might be some effect on their
Uh-huh.
SEC filings, all the things that could impact the company that a lawyer may not know about intuitively. So they come to us to say, what are those things? What else could we sell during this pitch if we're given the opportunity to do so? And not only does that open up cross selling, which we know that when a client is stickier with a firm, they're more likely to stay because it's harder to take that business and port it elsewhere, right? Not only does it allow them to bring a stickiness, hopefully, to our firm, but it also sets them up to be seen as business savvy advisors. They're trusted. They understand what really they're thinking about, what keeps them up at night, what the industry is going through, and to some extent, using a crystal ball to say, look, right now you say you're dealing with this, but on the horizon, we see the following 3 to 5 things. Let's talk about that as well and try to get ahead of it.
Uh-huh.
So that's the purpose that we serve as competitive intelligence. And if I may just add on to that for a moment, I think a lot of CI teams, not a lot, a few, are seen as order takers and they just do a lot of like tear sheets and,
Uh-huh.
you know, basic list building. And I find that insulting to my CI colleagues because the ones who I've worked with, and you know, a lot of the same people that I do, they're
Uh-huh.
very sharp. They have great ideas and they should be more than just order takers. And so, in my mind, the ideal CI professional at a law firm is not only somebody who understands the guts of the business
Uh-huh.
and can advise on maybe some legal opportunities, but
Uh-huh.
also take a look at the marketplace generally and look at who the competitors are, you know, or who are emerging competitors. So, you know, if you're a marketer outside of legal, you might think of
Uh-huh.
like your tiered competitor and peer lists. You know, some of them are
Uh-huh.
emerging, some of them you know you directly compete with, some of them are aspirational.
Uh-huh.
There should be multiple elements. I'm putting up my finger for two, like internal and external intelligence. But I think that a lot of teams get stuck doing just the basic, give me a tear sheet that's sort of
Uh-huh.
external intelligence about this firm without asking, well, what else do we need to know to be successful in this pitch or in this upcoming conversation? And I think that's where CI teams can shine.
That's fantastic because you kind of half answered my next question, which is that, I mean, you went there, which is great. There, you know, there has been an evolution, right? I mean, I'm asking it, I'm making a statement to get your perspective on. I believe that there's been an evolution of the CI function, starting almost from kind of called it childhood and birth. And I'm not talking that long ago. I'm thinking of 2014. So what is it, about 10 years ago? And, this was a business right prior to Kaitongo. It was more of a consulting business. And I sat down to speak to a very senior attorney who was close to retirement. So now we're talking about, 20 to 30 years prior to that. And he said, I mean, this all sounds great, but I never developed business. So I don't even know how to advise you. We never developed business in this way because all I did was to go to lunch.
Yeah.
And I, was very fortunate. I earned won a lot of business and was very successful. And I absolutely see we got to do it this way. So, and I'll add to that to say, I think there's less so in the United States. I'm in Canada, as you know. I still don't see a lot of firms that have formalized competitive intelligence functions. So I'd love for you to talk about that journey. I mean, when you started, I think you said about 8 years ago, was it already developed? What has been your perspective on this evolution of the CI function? And this will lead us into our next question about AI, but where do you see it evolving as well in terms of business use before we talk about technology and technical? Yeah.
Sure. So I think it depends on the culture of the firm and how they view business intelligence or competitive intelligence, depending on how they label the function at their firm. If we can agree that a good CI team's remit is to minimize risk and disruption to the firm, for strategic purposes, and also to enable revenue by supporting lawyers in the ways that we just discussed, then I think that you're going to be set up for success because leadership respects what you bring to the table, even if you're not a lawyer. I know everybody loves to have a lawyer in place in non-lawyer positions. Fine. But I'm not a lawyer and I'm a good analyst. Like you don't have to be a lawyer to be a good CI person. I'm not saying it doesn't help, but, if leadership knows that you understand the market, that you understand how to spot trends, how to interpret internal business intelligence, you stand a much better chance of being seen as a strategic resource versus the order taker that we spoke about. And then by extension, you can demonstrate that you need more team members. And that's what I did over time. I showed what was possible. Now, am I saying that I'm a CI expert? I am not. I'm just saying I love what I do. I absolutely love what I do. I'm always trying to find ways to make it better. Bigger, faster, stronger is kind of the joke that I use with some of my colleagues here. How can I be bigger, faster, stronger? How can my team be bigger, faster, stronger? And that gets recognized. If you don't have someone in leadership who sees that, who aligns with even if it's just an individual manager's vision of what that can be, then you may get stuck with either just one analyst. I won't say which firm it is, but I have a colleague at an AmLaw 50 firm she is the one and only CI person.
Oh, Jeff.
And their firm is larger than mine. Baker Botts has, I think, 650 lawyers at this point. I can't imagine being at a larger firm and not having help, but she's stuck with no help. And that to me speaks to how leadership views CI. So, maybe a smaller firm can get away with having a business developer who has a good mind for detail and critical thinking outside of what traditional business development does. Maybe they can get away with that. But I think if your firm is anything larger than maybe a small solo firm, you're going to need 1+ people if you want to do this right.
You make me laugh. So let me share. So I talked about a previous consulting business, and one of the engagements we did was a firm that called us in here in Canada and said, we don't have a CI function. It was a new chief operating officer who had come from some of the bigger global firms and said, we absolutely need to have this. And my little new company went up against Deloitte. Very proud to say we won against Deloitte on that engagement.
Of course you did.
And then we brought to bear our experience, doing this with consulting firms. And that was our first time we put together this idea of proactive competitive intelligence, which, as you know, and I'm still talking about roughly about 8 years ago, There was just talk about a key account management program, but we looked at all of that, interviewed a lot of the BD people, interviewed a lot of the lawyers, and came up with this model for proactive competitive intelligence that said, you need 10 people. This is your CI function.
Yeah.
10 people did not get implemented. I can tell you that. And
No, I can't imagine.
yeah, I think they implemented maybe 2 people who then unfortunately did turn into order takers and, sort of, let me print something out from S&P Capital IQ, and a few years later didn't exist anymore. And so, but yeah, there's that balancing act. And as I've always said, we worked a lot in a previous venture with consulting firms, and they had, I think Deloitte at one time, and probably still does, had about 150 people in India.
Wow.
And now you'd say, they're a lot bigger. Mm-hmm. Yes. But on the other hand, there is still the same number of industries and the same number of companies.
Yeah.
And yes, you have to sort of streamline that approach. But, the monitoring, especially of external data, doesn't go away. And I don't think the monitoring of internal data is less complex,
Right.
Yeah, less complex to some extent when you're a smaller firm. But, there's still that. So, and interesting, as you said, observation, I kind of digress. All right. So, on that note of scale and capacity and lack of capacity in some firms.
Your head's where my head's at. We're kindred spirits, Sumati.
Let's talk AI. So,
yes.
I think I don't even know what to call it, but there has been this impression of, ChatGPT was so exciting, and, all the way to the lawyers who think about it, who go, I can just put a question into ChatGPT and look at this, I get some answers. And you and me both know that's not where it is. So, want to hear your perspective just first at a high level, then we'll talk more about, specific tools, evolutions, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. Let me first start off by saying that the second that you said finding that balance with, can we have 10 teammates versus, the alternative, which is maybe 1. In this day and age, and this is why I'm bringing it up now, there is no excuse for not at least attempting to understand how AI can augment your operations.
That's right. Yeah.
I purposely started down the path of AI underpinning CI efforts, CI and marketing analytics. That's what I'm responsible for. So I purposely started down the path a couple of years ago when all of the news broke about ChatGPT, because I could see what it represented for my and my team's future. Being a small team, can't quite ever keep up with what's being asked of us. So how can we streamline some of the more straightforward requests without having to then also, say, well, we need more people to be able to do all of this stuff that's coming in. And that's how we initially started. We started with ChatGPT and then Harvey for, testing the waters on those, which we still use, by the way, the paid version of GPT-4. We still use that. I also use Claude Sonnet for coding questions that I have. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, we have spent the last 2 years effectively finding ways to strike that balance between how much headcount do we need and how much can AI help us, to the extent we trust it and can flip the results to a partner without having to spend 2 hours to double check what it spit out. Because that does you no good if you can't trust what it is that the tool is sending you. So gosh, I have so many feelings about AI. I just don't even know where to begin. So many people talk about AI. So many people come to me with these AI solutions. They call them AI solutions. And the second I get an email or a phone call from someone who's like, hey, I've got this great AI solution you want to check out, I'm like, what have you done for me lately? You haven't even asked me about what the pain points are that I'm experiencing. You have no idea how big my team is. You don't know the kinds of work that my team is doing, which could be vastly different from, say, my colleague Angela at Perkins Coie. You know what I mean? Like, you haven't even stopped to ask me about it. You're just trying to tell me that because you got AI in the mix, that somehow it's worth my time. And I'm like, no. So what I did for you in advance of this conversation, Sumati, is I wrote down a list of legal and non-legal vendors who, in my view, have come to the table with the right sales perspective, because they don't just send you an email and expect you to be wowed. They come to you with the whole pain point discussion.
Please tell me Kaitango is on that list, because as you said, the first scene was like, oh my God, did I, when I reached out to Lynn, did I ask?
No.
Okay.
Listen, Timothy, I'm trying not to be so biased. I'm trying very hard not to be biased.
No, and please don't. This is not intended to be at all a sales kind of discussion. But when you said that, I was like, it went to my brain to say, the first email I sent Linda, the first conversation I had, just ask her what she was doing. Anyway,
no.
I hope to think I did.
You're at the top of my list, and here's the list. And I feel like this is a good list. There are plenty of other tools out there, but again, we know that everybody's trying to say they use AI. So who are the vendors who really resonated with me? You, Origami. God, I'm gonna, if Paul Godritis hears that and I've butchered his company's name again, he's going to hang up on me the next time I talk to him. Databall. We know Andrew Hutchison is a genius.
Of course. Yeah.
Google Analytics 4. Everybody knows about Google Analytics 4, but it's great for trend spotting, and insight generation about what's happening on the web. Commentelli, which is not a legal vendor, but they have a great CI platform. I would say they and Crayon, both CI vendors, compete with Origami in that respect. But they do a lot of B2C as well. And so, we need professional services focused tools. Then there's Persado, which does copy testing and predictive outcomes based on those keywords you want to use. We need to do A/B testing on emails, websites. So that's one I've got my eye on. And then Brandwatch for just straight up social listening to figure out what are competitors talking about, what are our clients saying. So there are a lot of these vendors who have come across my desk, but only this group has really and truly stuck with me in my mind, because they made it about how can we serve you? And importantly, and I am going to reference Kaitango here, because this is something I feel like you do very well. Again, I know this is not a sales call, but here we are. When you bring Mahesh to a call, I know that you know what you're doing. This is your company. You founded this company, but you trust Mahesh to run the data science and the AI. Right. When you bring him to a call, you balance each other out. Many vendors will come to the party with just a salesperson who, when you try to push them on what their AI solution does and how is it built, how are you checking your results, what models are you using, all the questions that anybody with a real interest in AI would want the answers to. Yeah. They're like, well, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. Never the case when it comes to you and Mahesh. Yeah. Mahesh always has answers. And so if there's another vendor listening to this, take note. I'm not the only one who feels this way. If you can't come to me with a reasoned explanation as to why your AI solution is far superior and trustworthy, I'm not interested. I'm just not. So.
I mean, just picking up on that, and I think just three of the names that I know that you mentioned being obviously us, Origami, and Databall. It's about the industry knowledge ultimately, which at least I know these three organizations or firms bring to the table. It's been my sort of statement about AI applications in general is, yes, I mean, ChatGPT looks so easy to use, and including GPT-4, but it's the industry domain knowledge and the knowledge of current processes and how you translate that. That's what's going to matter to differentiate the vendors who continue to evolve.
Absolutely. And by the way, that's why I think that when people are wailing and gnashing their teeth and wringing their hands about how AI is going to replace people in CI, I think that's only true to an extent. I think I've said it earlier on this call, but I feel like AI is an augmenter, not a replacer. Why? Because of what you just said. You still have to have business domain knowledge. You still have to understand what your firm does, what's off limits, and all of the sort of the internal workings of the firm, plus the industries that you serve, to know if the data that you are getting back from whatever model that you're using is actually correct. And so but just for fun, sometimes I will ask a question of ChatGPT, and then when something seems a little suspicious, I'll ask it to show its sources and tell me where it got it from. And it does happen that it will say, I'm sorry, I don't have those sources. I'm just sort of taking all of these, these words that I found and putting them together because it seems like it might be right based on all these other things that I found, during my search. And that's not good enough. So you have to test these models, which again goes back to, you have to have the domain experience. You have to know what it is, at least have a sense of what it is that you're looking for. And I think you have to have a little bit of tech savvy too, to be able to know what questions you need to ask of these tools to feel confident in the output.
That's right. It's a version of, the big word called prompt engineering. Even asking a simple question is essentially a prompt. But you said something, and actually more so, that you asked me an interesting question last week about, what is different between a tool like ours, and maybe now we can extend it without being specific to Kaitongo, to Origami, Databall, etc., versus I can just hire a few engineers and data scientists. I know I was supposed to write you that email, but I'm going to ask you the question.
Okay.
And use your response. But yeah, I think that's part of the decision that organizations will be making, because at first glance it does look very simple and says, oh, I can take it from here. And so I think there's a two-part question there. Is in terms of this journey of integrating AI into your work process, and it's going to be an evolving journey for many years now, what does that translated to, let's say, in terms of instructions or guidance you give your team? Do this versus do what you used to do before, and how easy or difficult have you found that to be? And as well, this whole question as well of saying, are we going to go build our own tools because that's what it's going to take to customize? Or, well, there's 3 degrees there. Build our own, specialized vendors, kind of like you mentioned, or, just use the big open source vendors and pay whatever, $20, $60, $80 a month.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lot. You may have to remind me what it is that I owe you an answer. The first thing I would say is,
it's the what's different about the vendors question.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
The build or buy question is an interesting one, because I never thought that I would be in a situation where I had my own data engineer and data scientist who work well together and are building these resources for us to use. I will tell you that one reason that I went the build internally route for what you and I have discussed, just basic news summarization, some propensity scoring for the likelihood of an event occurring, that sort of thing, is because I want to have a secure, password protected, internally built, like inside of our firewalls, our environment, where we understand the security. We know where our data is coming and going from. And that's what I'm working on right now with our information security team, is, conveying all of the ways that we want to use this tool, the actual tools themselves, and the risks that we foresee. I'm not an InfoSec person, so I'm sure that I missed a few. But the fact is, I felt that in some respects, some of the basic tools that we've developed were worth developing internally for that reason. And also, and how, I don't know if I should use this phrase on a professional podcast, but I'm an anal retentive person. We can say that about me. It's fine. But what I would say is that I have very high, how about this? I have very high expectations for my team, for myself, for the information that we're going to set out. And so during the build internally process, we made sure that we developed our own bags of words, so that anytime a lawyer would say, ask for a news summarization on Intel, and what they're doing in the M&A space, that all of the bags of words relate to the keywords and the thinking that we use here at Baker Botts to inform what comes back. Do I think we're missing anything? No, I don't, because I've validated these words against other words that are out in the industry to make sure I'm not missing anything obvious or critical. But there has come a point, obviously, where we know we need vendors for very purpose-built tasks, such as Kaitongo, such as, we've been talking to Origami, we've been talking to Databall. We see the value of having an external vendor with teams larger than ours, with data scientists with that particular experience, bringing that to bear, as opposed to us having to build.
Yeah, exactly. I would say and I don't know how, actually, I haven't thought through completely how that range goes, but it's use the, GPT API, because obviously when we talk about using that, it's not ChatGPT retail, but it's the paid GPT API. Layer on, some of your data scientists. There's a cost to that. What we have found is that the first things can be built very easily and start to look really sexy. It's about the scale, the accuracy, the steadiness of it. It doesn't just break on certain questions, the extent of testing, and the specificity to the industry, because that's how we would position against, let's say, a $9 billion player like Perplexity, who's doing it for every industry and every kind of question. And so no question, they need hundreds, if not more, of data engineers and data scientists working together to get to the same level of, stability and accuracy and so on. Well, I'm gonna give you, your time back, and I think we should conclude here. We've covered a lot. It's been great. And thank you so much for your time on this podcast. Thank you so much for your support in general of vendors like us. Appreciate it very much.